This is the Page Publishing Book Club. How you doing? I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. Paul Sciamella was born in Brooklyn, raised in Nassau County, joined the Navy at 17 and never looked back. He became a Navy SEAL, then traveled the world teaching other governments how to defeat terrorism, which gave him a depth of experience to draw on for 3 novels published with Page. The first, entitled Jungle Rule.
The 3 books are a trilogy. They're connected by characters and themes, and they fit together seamlessly. I'd like to talk about the second book, which is called A More Perfect Union, because that book focuses on domestic terrorism and the struggle for justice. And I mean, it's such a timely subject. I mean, it's in the headlines every day. My story is set in 1999, 4 years after the Oklahoma City bombing and 2 years before 9/11. And basically the story is that a right-wing militia in Wyoming is suspected of bombing the Air and Space Museum in Washington. And then 2 of my characters go undercover for the FBI to live inside the militia and take it down. I would say suspenseful is not a strong enough word to describe the plot. One reader told me he finished the book on the 6th of January while watching the assault on Capitol Hill. And he said he lost track of what was real and what was fiction.
So was that domestic terrorism, in your opinion?
I think it was. We don't know everything yet, but it would fit my definition.
So your book, so they go into the militia, and what happens?
Well, they go in as a married couple, and the rules of this militia are that to get into the inner circle, you need to be married. And they find out why later, but they manage to get into the inner circle, and that is indeed an organization dedicated to overthrowing the government, to starting a popular revolt. The cover for the inner circle is a law-abiding militia, a group of citizens who really don't know what's going on the inside. They provide a cover for the terrorist leader. My characters, they become key players in the militia, and they have to demonstrate their loyalty. And it's one of these roller coaster rides that you really don't know what's going to happen. And at the end, before they can bust the group and before the FBI comes in to arrest everybody, they're basically held hostage to the terrorist cell. And they find out that the terrorist cell is planning a large-scale, catastrophic act of terrorism in California. So they stay longer than they should because they're the only ones that can stop it. So one of them ends up in an airplane, and I don't want to give away too much. And the woman ends up being discovered. Her cover is blown, and she has to run for her life. So it was just a lot of fun to put this together. I'm very, very happy with it. I didn't realize I was going to write 3 novels. My challenge was to see if I could write 1 novel. So I wrote 1 novel called Jungle Rules about a mercenary with a midlife crisis. And hey, we've all got them, so why not mercenaries? So after that, I decided to write the second book about the militia. And then I realized that I really needed to go back and fill in a lot of the details on the group of characters that inhabited the first story. And some of those characters didn't make it through the end of the second book, so I had to write a prequel. And I brought back all the original characters in a story about Manuel Noriega. The Revenge of the Dictator is about what he might have done to us, the United States and Panama, to take revenge for invading his country and sending him to a Florida prison. So the prequel, Dictator's Revenge, takes place in 1993. The first book, Jungle Rules, takes place in Latin America in 1998. And then the middle book about the terrorist militia takes place in 1999. So you can read them in any order. They fit together seamlessly. So.
All right, Paul. This reminds me of that TV series 24. Be a perfect script. Thank you. A professional athlete, Lawrence D. Jones, played European basketball back in the 70s, and when he retired, he put all of his energy into his creative designs. They include stadiums, architecture, paintings, writing, and teaching. The name of his book, Students of Creative Teachers.
What inspired me was, after I retired, I was invited to the NFL summer youth camp to talk about creativity. So they asked me to come up with a title for a class. So I came up with the title Creative Careers. And the day that I got there, I walked in to the class and it was kids on the front steps, alongside the walls, on the floor. I mean, they was everywhere. And it just shocked me to see the reactions of the kids. And so, after the class was over, they invited me to become a counselor at the camp. And I did that for a summer. And it just showed me how creativity crosses boundaries that, little else can. They were middle school and high schoolers. It was a summer youth camp. It was mostly disadvantaged kids.
So what did you come up with?
Well, the kids took over. First of all, I presented my creative paintings, poetry, everything that I could come up with. And I just left the rest of it open to the kids. And so the kids got up, they started rapping, they started singing, they, showing pictures, they was just into it. And I saw that how creativity it opens up. It fosters a comprehensive connection between teachers, parents, and students. And my book, it helps teachers conduct a 6 to 8 week creative course. And it helps students develop and express, their creative potential. It encourages confidence and literacy, critical thinking, and also social awareness.
Give me an example.
Well, it has a 6 to 8 week creative course. So, your first week, a student may choose to recite a poem from the book, and other kids listen and critique it. Okay, the second week, you do the same thing. You pick another poem in the book and you recite it, but you do it with a picture. You create your own picture to go along with it. The third week, you discuss, use statistics on, drug abuse, gun violence. So they pick a certain poem to discuss in class. And then it gets to the point to where, like the fifth week, you do a class group discussion. You assign a group of kids, 4 or 5 kids, to a certain group, and they come up with like a presentation. So the book is really interesting. This book is great for schools. Now, if you want to know more, you can go to my website, which is a really easy website to remember. It's History200.com.
All right, Lawrence, thank you so much. An auditor for an insurance company in Alabama, writing is an outlet for Kimberly Williams. She started in high school and was really put to the test when she got her master's in psychology. As a lover of thrillers and suspense, she finally wrote her own entitled Through Narrowed Eyes.
It's a novel where Lisa Hatchett, she's the leading character, has a great career as a psychoanalyst and a wonderful husband who happens to be a detective. Everybody loves Lisa. But she starts getting these menacing phone calls and letters. And also, it's at the same time where dead bodies are turning up in this small town in Ingleton, Minnesota. And she's wondering if there's a connection there. Her husband is he's mostly following up on these leads, and there are twists in this story. So it's full of suspense, and it starts with action, it ends with action. There are different characters in this story. Some readers may think it's this person or that person. So it's up to the reader to figure it out. But at the end, I think it's going to be a really big surprise.
The question is, who would want to hurt her and why? So she's got a backstory, right?
Yes, she's been in and out of foster care throughout her adolescent years, and that's because of the death of her parents. And of course, she made friends, throughout her years. But as she got older, with her going through the mental distress of losing her parents, is the reason why she went to school to become a psychoanalyst, to help others, in that field, to help them get through their mental stresses and all. And so, which is why she became this great psychoanalyst. So, yes, that's her backstory.
So there's people that she's met along the way who may not be, who may be unsavory.
Well, not to her knowledge though, because the people she made friends with in her foster care, they became really good friends. So no one unsavory to her, to her liking, but who knows? This is the very first book that I've officially published, but in October, I published 4 short stories on my daughter's website. It's entitled The 99 by my daughter Carmela. And every week for the month of October, I penned a horror short story on her website. So we kind of lead people to that website through our social medias, our Instagram. She has Facebook, LinkedIn's, I mean, any type of social media we're a part of. And that's to kind of get my horror side out there, you know.
So how did that work out for you?
Oh, that was so much fun. I write what I know. I know suspense, I know horror. I love reading, the romance novels and, whatnot, but I'm good at writing the thrillers.
All right, I will take your word for that. Thank you, Kimberly. You could say C.L. Grayson was born to move. I mean, literally. His parents already had the business before he was born. So 50 years later, you can imagine the experience he has to share in his book, We're Moving Again.
It's like, oh God, we're moving again, because moving is terribly stressful. That's part of it, what's in my book.
Well, I think it's right up there with, divorce.
Yeah.
It's that stressful.
Because, when you think about it with moving, there can be, happy moves. You're going to Hawaii or something. But then there's deaths, there's divorce. And one of the things that I used to do, I'd go in houses to do estimates. And one of the things the industry says, it's really hard to break the ice. How do you break the ice, And the first thing I'd say is, so you're moving to Chicago. And then they started telling me why.
So all of these other van lines, have popped up since you started out. What makes the difference?
If you're dealing with a major van line, you're probably going to be okay. They really aren't bad. There could be a bad move.
Well, what makes a move bad?
Oh, gosh. You could have packers, for example. They may or may not be experienced. It can be one that doesn't show up for a few days. As a matter of fact, I had a shipment going from California to New York, and naturally, if it's Manhattan, it's an apartment. So it's this old couple, and I always tell the people, now here's the delivery period, say between the 16th and the 20th. Van Line calls me and they said, we can't make it till the 22nd. I said, oh man, you've got to be kidding. So I called the people and I talked to the husband, and he goes, what am I going to do? I don't have furniture. I don't have anywhere. And I said, sir, we will pay for a hotel for you and all that. And he goes, well, my wife and I don't want to go to a hotel. He says, she's sitting against a wall right now with no furniture, and I hope she doesn't die. No pressure there, right? And I said, sir, we'll pay for a hotel for you. Nope, not going to do it. Well, thank God that the shipment was only 1 day late. And he called me, and he was happy, and they got their stuff and all this kind of stuff. And believe it or not, in less than a year, they called me. We're coming back to California.
Oh.
And I said, okay. And by the way, they went to New York because they were originally from New York. And I moved them again.
Oh, that's amazing. You must have had such a great time writing this book.
I did. I just tell little stories for years, and people said, oh, you should write a book. Well, you always hear that. But then once I got retired, I said, I got time on my hands, so I'd think of this story and that story. And almost all of them have a surprise ending. Like the lady I moved from San Francisco area to Ireland. And she was a big Titanic fan and stuff like that. Well, at the end of the book, what it tells you is she actually moved across the street from where the Titanic was launched. And she said, that's where I want to spend the rest of my years. I said, okay. Also part of the book that deals with my advice on packing boxes, for example. and moving with children, animals, autos, overseas, things like that. And the humorous part of the book is there's, well, to be honest with you, the inventories that are written sometimes are written by guys that don't have the best education. And you should see some of the spellings. And so I have a whole page of spellings. Like one guy wrote a rug sucker, which is, he couldn't say vacuum. And so tiny bit of humor, a little bit of humor.
For decades, John Fosse directed and performed in musicals while he worked in construction. He started writing poetry as a teen, and in that, he found a friend, a place where he could express himself. He shares his process in his book, A Game with the Mind, to see what you can find.
What it basically does is it goes through and it finds for a person basically why the need for poetry. It goes into some of the ways to write it, or mechanisms or methodology for writing poetry. Basically, it starts with an emotion. It starts with a difficulty, something that's driving your emotions. And it tells in the book how to convert that into something that is beneficial. You're learning to find who you are inside. Sigmund Freud was very good at describing the id and the superego and some of those things, and I talk about that in the book. And also I draw upon other poets and some of the experiences they have had with poetry. I think one of the most interesting one, I won't say his name because he may not appreciate it, but he says, I was sexually abused over the course of 2 years as a child, and poetry helped me unbottle all those emotions and feelings that I had bottled up from that period in my life. And this is what this can do. It's communicating with oneself. It's a methodology that I teach in the book to help a person learn how to do that, because not everybody, and most people really, don't know how to start. And so I teach them how to get started, how to write, the use of syllables, how they work, and all the various intricacies, the elements of poetry, like the different sounds of poetry, how to write it. If you're to go through the content of the book, it kind of goes from an introduction of what I experienced as a youth, the words and syllables and how they work together and the methodology. And then it starts in with simple poetry, really simple stuff, to give the person who's doing it, or reading the book, the opportunity to try out their abilities on some real simple stuff. And then it goes into the sounds of poetry and how to make those sounds consonant. I won't go into those. And the different types of literary devices, like metaphors, similes, that kind of stuff. And the effective syllables, the effective syllables. But then it also goes into all the different rhyme schemes through the ages and how to write them. And so basically it's not only a book for an individual who is having difficulty, but if they want to take it and they love it and they want to run with it, it teaches them how to do it all.
So by the end of this book, you should be able to write a poem.
Yeah, you're certainly getting into it, you betcha. It's like riding a bike. Anybody can ride a bike. I mean, I believe that anybody can write poetry. It's like riding a bike. You have to have forward motion to have balance. True? You need to have forward motion to have balance. And so it is with poetry. I teach the forward motion, and they learn the balance.
All right, John, thank you. A doctor at a VA hospital in New Jersey for 26 years, John Milano is also a poet, and the pandemic gave him the opportunity to write his book entitled Mostly Pandemic Poetry.
It was inspired by the pandemic. Two things happened in 2020. First of all, my wife and I were living in New Jersey, but we had relatives in Nevada who became very sick, and there was nobody to take care of them. And then the pandemic hit. So now they were really in trouble. If they had gone out, if they had ever caught COVID, they wouldn't have made it. So my wife left and came to Nevada to help them. She couldn't even really visit with the aunts, my relatives, because she couldn't bring germs into their residence. I mean, she could have killed them. So she was really all alone. So in order to keep her company, I started writing her letters, real letters, not emails, on loose leaf letters. And I would include a poem or two with each letter. And I was writing her like maybe 3 letters a week, along with telephone calls and text messages and all that kind of stuff. And so I had always wanted to write a book of poetry. And about 2 or 3 months in, I said to myself, hey, I have enough poetry here that I could start thinking about putting together a book. I have a very sad bunch of topics. A lot of bad things happened during 2020, the pandemic, the riots, all that kind of stuff. But that was kind of like a way to kind of pull everything together and kind of make a book out of it. Each poem is a book in and of itself. Um, and the pandemic and all the kind of rotten things and some good things that happened during 2020 kind of enabled me to put together a good book of poetry with kind of like a theme running through it, which was very nice.
So, do you have a short one you could share with me?
Sure. Okay. The name of the poem is called "The Warriors." The warrior stands on Ellesmere Bridge. The wood speaks aloud as he walks, injecting needed courage. The water rippled forth life under the pale blue moon. Insects singing inspired lyrics, songs of impending doom. He drew forth his swords and charged into battle. For 1,000 years, his forefathers were the vanguard of struggle. No need to know who was right or who was wrong. He wanted to own the hour, and it belonged to the strong. But this is the past. He's now a relic, forgotten in the future. His way was all graphic. The youth are all driven by computers. All the power now is in the movement of a little finger. All his power now is in the movement that still lingers. That life he was about to take, so many on display, more than a game, more than a gamble, more than a cliche. It was with grave unimportance I will now leave you here. It is with tame ambivalence I introduce you to the new warrior frontier. Hey, I've been 25 years going hard. Most nights now I just sleep in the park. Nothing else matters until I get high. Life is difficult, I do not deny. Even my feelings, I love you so, but hatred and fear are all that I know. I've had so many conversations I never relinquished, wrote so many letters that I never finished. Of all my friends' lives, mine was the thinnest. So many brilliant auras, yet mine was diminished. As I awake today, I'm the oldest man on the beach. I've decided to surrender, jump out of the breach. Please step back as I go from reddish to blackish, and know I'm alive before that I vanish. Shadows getting long, time to go back to school. We just don't understand how Satan managed our fall. No one will admit when it began for real, when rock and roll came and deranged us all. What if the Carthaginians had won? What was that the loss that caused Satan plans coming undone? What if the Germans had won? There was never a more satanic empire under the sun. What if the vampires had won? I speak too soon, those blood drinkers are not yet done. What if the demons come here? Not if, but when, still the time is not clear. What if we just don't care? As long as humans are consumers, they'll never be aware. All the warriors from age to age sit back in apprehension and turn the page.
So, that had nothing to do with the pandemic.
Most of it was written during the pandemic. About 3/4 of it was written during the pandemic. And of that, the vast majority of it has something to do with the pandemic in some way or another. But like I said, just like that one. So I said, okay, I'll read that one for you.
Good enough, John. Thanks. You could say Benjamin Wolf has flies buzzing around his head, giving him ideas while he's driving professionally and doing other things. The result is his book, Buzz and Zip.
It stems from me and my dad, my grandfathers, kind of all rolled into one character, kind of the adventures and things that we go on. One day it was like this little character was having a conversation with me while I was at work in Scottsdale doing some work for a contractor there. And it was the funniest thing. It's a little cartoon characters, and I couldn't figure it out. And I guess it was kind of like my subconscious was saying, let's do this, let's do this. But the characters were created a little while after that, after the initial conversation. I had another conversation with more of the characters on July 4th, 1999, when we were waiting for the fireworks to start up. And all of a sudden, it's like they're buzzing around in my subconscious, talking and telling me, hey, check this out, look at this, and saying, there's, adventures to go on and all this kind of thing. And I thought, what? So by the end of that little trip to Pine Top up there for the 4th of July, I actually was getting episode titles for little episodes in my mind about these characters going on little adventures together.
What are they? Are they horseflies?
They're like houseflies from the East Coast, but they don't have a certain place that they stick to perfectly because they can live basically anywhere they like. And they live with various people who don't even know they're there. It's like in New Jersey, New York, various places, but they moved from there to the desert just to kind of escape the cold winters for a while, but they're still East Coasters. They still love, the East Coast and their friends and family. But they do have a lot of different types of friends: blowflies, blue flies, black flies, dragonflies, horseflies, of course, and various personalities. And that's the fun part. This is where I get to hopefully eventually put this together in animated form and cover a bunch of the voices for the characters themselves, from like a horsefly that talks kind of like the Duke, to various others that are great personalities that kids may not know of when they're young, but they will learn who they are because they're just iconic. It's like you can get Elvis and others who would be participating as a type of personality, although we wouldn't call them Elvis, of course. That would be a different sort, like Flavis Pesley would be our version, And they live with a librarian, Dexter, who doesn't really know that they're around, but Buzz, being Zip's mentor, he's educating him. They're the premise of A Fly on the Wall, and he brought a friend to observe things, to learn, to check on stuff, kind of through the eyes of these cartoon flies. They observe people and life and the things that are going on. First book, the introductory, they're living in the house preparing to move in New Jersey, and the owners didn't see them there, and they were saying, it's getting cold now, and they're going to be packing up and going to another place. But it talked about moving and what happens to people when they have to move, and what they go through, and it can be all right. Everything will work out.
All right, Ben, and we got to buzz out of here. This is the Page Publishing Book Club. I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. Download the podcast at 710WOR.com.